Hey guys, tonight we drift into the shadowy alleys of a city that was once the crown jewel of the ancient world. You're standing in Rome, or what's left of it, not the Rome of gleaming triumphal arches and toga-clad senators passionately yelling about grain shipments. No, tonight you've arrived in the late Roman Empire, somewhere in the 5th century, when everything still has the shape of grandeur, but none of the energy. The sun hangs low and red, casting a sleepy glow over moss-covered columns and chipped statues that haven't seen a good polishing in decades. You brush past ivy that's slowly conquering once pristine marble. You hear the soft clop of sandals, not from soldiers, but from bureaucrats heading to another dreary Senate meeting where they'll mostly argue about nothing that matters. A pigeon coos from atop a statue of Julius Caesar, and honestly, the pigeon might have more political influence than most of the remaining officials these days. You duck into a villa that used to house a noble family. Now it's split between 7 different families and a goat. The goat is the best fed among them. The city is still technically functioning, in the way a wind-up toy still turns a few more clicks after you drop it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk the uneven stones of the Forum, stepping around a dog asleep in front of the old Curia. Once the Roman Senate ruled half the known world from this spot. Now the senators meet irregularly, their debates mostly ceremonial. No one's been stabbed here in years. Honestly, that's part of the problem. Rome at this point is more ghost than government. It's still technically the capital of the Western Empire, although that designation wobbles depending on which emperor you ask, or which barbarian is marching closer at the moment. There's even a guy in Ravenna with more say than most folks in the city itself. But we'll get to him. You take a seat on a half-broken bench and watch a procession of dusty soldiers trudge past, armor scuffed and mismatched. Some wear Roman tunics, others sport furs, clearly not native Romans. The legions, once a finely tuned war machine, are now held together with mercenary contracts and hopeful glances. You sip some lukewarm wine from a chipped goblet. It's vinegary, but it's doing its job. Across the courtyard, 2 children chase each other with sticks, pretending they're generals. It's cute, but you can't help, thinking that in 10 years, one of them might actually be leading troops, because adult leadership is in dangerously short supply. One senator emerges from the old basilica, mumbling something about grain shortages and Visigoth bribes. Another is arguing with a fishmonger about tax relief. The fishmonger is winning. The Senate, you see, has become a social club with better robes. By now, you've noticed the architecture. Much of it dates back centuries, but it's wearing down. Roofs are patched with wood. Public fountains run dry. The aqueducts still carry water, but only if no one sneezes too hard near the old masonry. Historians still argue whether the Western Roman Empire was in decline or just transforming. But you're here, and it feels like decline. The empire still collects taxes, still drafts soldiers, still issues edicts, but fewer people care each year. There's a creeping apathy in the streets, a feeling that the lights are dimming and no one's reaching for the switch. Of course, it's not all doom and gloom. A baker near the old Palatine Hill still makes excellent flatbread. You stop in, and he slips you a slightly burnt piece. He's apologetic, but you chew thoughtfully. It's still warm. He tells you stories about the old days, when imperial parades filled the streets. Now the most exciting thing on the calendar is when someone finds a working bronze coin in a gutter. As you walk back toward the Tiber River, the sky darkens. The old stone bridge ahead is missing 2 arches, flood damage from years ago. No one ever got around to repairing it. You cross carefully on a temporary wooden path, hoping it holds. On the other side, a group of monks light candles at a small shrine. The Christian faith has risen to dominance, and the temples of the old gods are mostly empty now, except for stray cats and curious teenagers. You remember a time when Jupiter and Mars got more offerings than Christ, but those days are gone. You pass a crumbling theater, where a half-hearted performance is underway, some tragedy about a fallen hero. The crowd is thin, mostly older folks nodding off between lines. A child claps too early and is hushed by his grandmother. The actors don't seem to mind. At this point, applause is a bonus. As you stroll back through the alleys, a chilly breeze stirs the air. Laundry hangs between buildings like surrender flags. A few residents wave as they light oil lamps, flickering flames that cast long shadows on the peeling walls. The Empire's twilight isn't just metaphorical, it's literally happening in the flicker of each lamp, the pause between each echoing footstep. And somewhere far beyond the horizon, new threats are stirring, tribes you've barely heard of, emperors with far less patience, and generals who won't wait for permission. But that's a tale for the next mile of our journey. For now, you find a quiet place to rest beneath an olive tree, just outside the old city wall. The stars above are ancient, unmoved by the affairs of men. Rome may falter, but the sky keeps shining. You close your eyes as the wind carries the faint scent of ashes, olives, and the last notes of an out-of-tune lyre echoing across the rooftops. You wake to the soft sound of birds, but not the elegant doves you'd expect from ancient mosaics. These are scruffy, loud, suspiciously aggressive city birds, pecking at breadcrumbs by the old wall. The city is stirring again, sluggishly, but outside those crumbling walls, something else is already moving. Quieter, colder, and far less sleepy. You stretch, brushing off dust from your tunic, and glance toward the north. That way lies the frontier, or what used to be the frontier. It's hard to tell these days. The line between the Roman world and barbarian lands has blurred into a sort of geopolitical shrug. You've heard the rumors. Entire tribes, the Visigoths, Vandals, Suebi, are drifting west like storm clouds, slow and heavy. They're not invading exactly, at least not yet. It's more like they're arriving. Uninvited guests with ox carts, families, livestock, and a vague expectation that someone here will feed them and hand over a province or two. You pass a dusty caravan in the Forum, a Gothic family camped by an old fountain. The mother is plucking lice from her daughter's hair. The father sharpens a rusty blade. No one's sure whether they're refugees or invaders. Truthfully, they might not know either. Back in the Senate, the debate is lukewarm and unending. Some argue for war, others for peace treaties and integration. A few suggest just giving the Goths Spain and calling it a day. It's like watching someone negotiate with termites. Polite, feudal, and faintly itchy. The Empire is trying to digest something it never meant to swallow. The sheer scale of migration is overwhelming. Tens of thousands of newcomers, many armed, many tired of being pushed around by Huns or frostbite, are pressing into Roman lands. And unlike the Rome of old, the Western Empire doesn't exactly have the muscle to push back anymore. Historians still argue whether the Romans were too proud to integrate the barbarians, or too desperate not to. What you see on the ground, though, is chaos mixed with bureaucracy, edicts written in Latin telling Germanic warlords where to settle. Tax collectors who don't speak the same language as the taxpayers. A lot of shrugging. At the markets, you notice things are changing. You overhear Gothic being spoken next to Latin. A merchant is trying to convince a Vandal woman that his amphorae are good for storing mead. She looks unconvinced. There are goats where there used to be statues. You see a Roman child playing tag with a Frankish one. Cultures are colliding, blending, tripping over each other. You wander to a distant farm where the landowner is nervously sharing his estate with a group of Ostrogoth warriors. They're technically foederati, federated allies granted land in exchange for military service. In practice, it looks more like the landowner now politely asks permission to harvest his own olives. At dinner, you're invited to sit on a broken wine barrel and share a stew. The Goths are friendly, for now. One of them, a towering man with braided hair and a scar across his cheek, tells you he's tired of war. He just wants land, peace, and a place to raise his sons. You nod. Everyone's tired. But there's tension. Always tension. A Roman farmer walks by and refuses to make eye contact. One empire, now two worlds forced to coexist, like awkward roommates who don't speak the same language and argue about who left a sword in the well. You hike to the edge of a ruined fort, once a proud outpost, now a storage shed for hay and arrows. The wall has been breached and never repaired. You pick up a rusty helmet and shake out a spider. Military decay, like everything else. From here, you can see the Alps in the distance, jagged and eternal. Beyond them lies the rest of the Gothic migration, the wandering tide that keeps flowing westward. A storm in slow motion. You imagine what the legions of Julius Caesar would have done. Probably built 3 walls, named all the hills, and called it a province by lunch. But those legions are dust now. Even the language of empire is changing. Fewer locals speak proper Latin. More speak a mishmash of tongues, Gallo-Roman, Gothic, bits of vulgar Latin. You ask for directions and get a shrug and a joke about how even Jupiter's lost his GPS. At the docks along the Tiber, you spot something peculiar, a small fleet of riverboats flying banners you've never seen before. More migrants, or maybe raiders. The line blurs. Roman customs officers, if they even show up, mostly just wave people through. The empire's gates are open, not because of policy, but because no one's guarding them anymore. One quirky tale you overhear in a tavern is about a Roman governor who tried to bribe a group of incoming vandals with amphorae full of expired olive oil. The vandals drank it anyway, thanked him, then took the province. Diplomacy, 5th century style. And yet, despite all this, people go on living. A girl sings as she washes clothes in the river. A monk copies a tattered manuscript by candlelight. A farmer counts his chickens, twice because one keeps disappearing. The rhythm of daily life persists, stubborn and soft. The empire, you realize, isn't collapsing like a tower of bricks. It's decaying like fruit, slowly, from the inside out, soft in places, still firm in others. You wouldn't bet on it lasting forever, but you wouldn't declare it dead, just yet, either. And so, you walk the streets again, past Gothic tents, Roman columns, and broken statues. Somewhere, someone's arguing about who's to blame. Somewhere, a scribe is recording it all. Somewhere, an emperor pretends everything's fine. The breeze carries the scent of wood smoke and boiled cabbage. You wrap your cloak tighter and keep walking. The empire flickers, but it hasn't gone out. Not yet. You're back in Rome, or what's pretending to be Rome, and the city has a new hobby: collecting emperors. Not in the grand, triumphant way you might imagine. No bronze statues or golden laurels here. No, this is more like a chaotic parade of mildly competent administrators, teenage aristocrats, and the occasional puppet installed by some general with trust issues. You sit down on a worn stone bench and try to remember who's actually in charge. Let's see. Honorius? No, he's long gone. Valentinian III? Dead. Petronius Maximus? Gone after just 70 days. Avitus? Brief. Majorian? Actually decent, but assassinated. It's like playing Imperial Bingo, but everyone loses. In fact, between 455 and 476 CE, you count no fewer than 9 emperors. Some ruled from Rome, others from Ravenna, some from Gaul, and one from behind a particularly sturdy curtain in a villa he refused to leave. The imperial title has become a hot potato, and nobody wants to get burned. As you wander through the old palace grounds, you pass a scribble on a wall, some graffiti left by a bored city youth. It reads, "Another emperor? Wake me when it's Jupiter." You chuckle. Same. You bump into a palace servant who's been there since Theodosius. He waves a mop and mutters, "Back in my day, emperors at least lasted longer than a loaf of bread." He says it with fondness and a hint of mildew. One reason for this constant shuffling? The real power isn't with the emperors anymore. It's with the generals, the magister militum, men like Ricimer, who installed and removed emperors like changing sandals. Ricimer wasn't even a Roman-born. He was a Suevic Gothic warlord who couldn't legally be emperor himself, so he ruled through hand-picked emperors like some medieval ventriloquist. Historians still argue whether Ricimer was a necessary evil or the parasite that finally brought the host down. You just know that if he ever smiled, it probably meant someone was about to be poisoned. You attend an imperial ceremony, well, sort of. It's more of a we found someone willing to wear the purple robe celebration. The new emperor, Libius Severus, looks bewildered as he stares at the crumbling steps of the basilica. A bird poops on his banner before he finishes his first speech. Auspicious. Even the citizens are getting numb to it. You overhear two shopkeepers talking. Who's emperor now? Not sure. Some guy with a mustache. Ah, well, as long as taxes don't go up. Spoiler, they do. The throne, once a symbol of divine authority and imperial might, is now a chair people back into slowly, hoping no one notices until they're already dead or exiled. The robes don't fit. The crown is tarnished. The scepter has been pawned. Twice. You duck into a small church where a bishop is giving a sermon that includes a subtle jab at the emperor's competence. Nobody flinches. Even the clergy know the imperial office has become mostly ceremonial, like being prom king at a funeral. Some emperors try to fix things. Majorian actually enacts reforms, tries to build ships, restore laws, stand up to the aristocracy. Naturally, he's betrayed and killed by Ricimer. The lesson? Don't try too hard. Mediocrity is safer. You meet a young noble named Julius who tells you, "I want to be emperor someday." You nod politely. He probably also wants to be a unicorn. Becoming emperor in this era has less to do with ambition and more to do with being convenient, pliable, and not allergic to daggers. There's one quirky little tale you hear in a tavern. Apparently, one of the puppet emperors only agreed to take the job after negotiating for extra pillows in the palace. You respect the priorities. Back at the palace, a new proclamation is being written. It's full of the usual fluff. Divinely appointed, restorer of peace, beloved of the people. You glance outside. The streets are mostly empty, save for a dog chasing a chicken. And yet, the illusion continues. The rituals, the ceremonies, the titles, they all play out like a tired stage production. The audience may have left, but the actors still hit their marks. Just barely. In one overgrown courtyard, you find a marble bust of Augustus, moss creeping over his cheekbones. You brush it off gently and wonder what he'd say if he saw all this. Probably something imperial and scathing. You pass a group of soldiers playing dice. One of them jokes, "If I win, I get to be emperor next week." They laugh, then pause. It might actually happen. You walk the old roads leading out of Rome and see the cracks widening. Each new emperor seems to patch one and ignore 10 others. The whole structure is holding together out of habit, tradition, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, someone will figure things out. But deep down, everyone knows. This isn't Rome at its height. This is Rome holding its breath. The sun sets, casting long shadows over the half-empty palace. You pause and look back one more time. Behind those doors, someone else is trying on the imperial robe. You wish them luck. They'll need it. You leave behind the echoing halls of powerless emperors and head northeast, toward the swampy coastal city of Ravenna, a place that, much like a weird cousin who unexpectedly inherits the family estate, has become the de facto capital of the Western Roman Empire. Why Ravenna? Because it's surrounded by marshes, and apparently the empire's new strategy is to make itself as inconvenient to invade as possible. But you're not here for the scenery. You're here to meet the man who's actually running things. Flavius Stilicho. He's not an emperor. He doesn't want to be. He's too smart for that. Stilicho is the Magister Militum, the master of soldiers, and that title means exactly what it sounds like. He's the real authority behind the curtain, especially during the early 5th century, when the emperors are mostly decorative. You arrive at the military barracks near Ravenna just in time to see Stilicho reviewing the troops. His cape is dusty, his sword well used, and his expression says, "I haven't slept in 3 days. Don't make me explain things twice." The soldiers, many of them Germans, some from distant provinces, stand at attention, but they all listen when he speaks. His voice cuts through the sea wind like a general who has had to babysit an entire empire. And in many ways, he has. Stilicho spent years holding the Western Empire together with frayed rope and threats of mild violence. The Emperor Honorius, who should have been the one making decisions, was more interested in raising chickens and rearranging his tunics by color. You suspect he once confused a battle report for a dinner menu. You walk through the training grounds, watching Stilicho manage alliances, oversee fort construction, bribe the right Gothic leaders, and write letters to Constantinople all in the same morning. It's like watching someone juggle flaming swords while riding a tired mule through a thunderstorm. Historians still argue whether Stilicho was a loyal Roman patriot or a self-serving power broker. You see a man worn thin by compromise. He's half Vandal by blood, but fully Roman by ambition, married into the imperial family, father to a daughter promised to the emperor, and holding the empire's shaky military spine intact almost single-handedly. There's one quirky little tale. During a lull between Gothic invasions, Stilicho allegedly hosted a gladiatorial show just to keep morale up in Ravenna. Problem is, there weren't enough trained fighters left, so they staged it with farmers and 2 trained dogs. The dogs won. You sit with one of Stilicho's junior officers who mutters under his breath, "If Stilicho falls, we're done." The man says it like it's common knowledge. It is. And then, of course, politics happens. Stilicho, for all his military genius, isn't invincible. Courtiers whisper. Eastern Roman officials don't trust him. The emperor, Honorius, when not petting pigeons, is fed paranoid stories by palace advisors who claim Stilicho plans to usurp the throne. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. But truth doesn't stand a chance in this political swamp. And so, one day in 408 CE, Stilicho is arrested. Not on the battlefield, not with honor. In a church where he seeks sanctuary, he's dragged out, accused of treason, and executed by order of the very emperor he protected for decades. You hear the news in Ravenna's forum. There's no riot, no parade, just silence, and then a slow unraveling. Without Stilicho, the Western Roman Empire is like a wagon with 3 wheels, heading downhill, driven by a guy who just discovered wheels yesterday. You revisit the barracks. They're quieter now. Discipline is fading. Recruitment falters. Commanders bicker over who should lead what's left. The army, once a battered but cohesive force, starts to fall apart. Units desert. Allies rebel. Even some of Stilicho's trusted officers defect to Alaric, the Gothic king. Speaking of Alaric, remember him? He's still out there, and now there's no Stilicho to hold him back. But that's a tale for another section. You stop by Stilicho's old quarters. His sword still hangs on the wall, untouched. His maps are rolled up in a corner, gathering dust. You sit in his chair, and for a moment, you feel the weight he carried. The empire was never really stable, not by this point, but Stilicho managed to keep it upright. Barely. And with his death, the last functioning central pillar in the West splinters. It's hard not to admire the man. He wasn't perfect. He made enemies. He failed to stop some invasions. But when you compare him to the rotating cast of forgettable emperors, Stilicho was a colossus in a world of cardboard cutouts. The people know it too. You hear quiet laments in churches, whispered prayers for the general who tried. A street poet even scribbles a line. Stilicho fought shadows with light till shadows bit back. It's not great poetry, but the sentiment's there. Outside, the streets of Ravenna grow colder. Soldiers mumble. The Gothic threat looms closer. Honorius? He's focused on naming his pigeons again. His latest favorite is called Imperium. Fitting. It's just as flighty. As night falls, you leave Stilicho's quarters and walk past a weathered statue of a Roman eagle, wings chipped and rusting with rain. You look up and wonder if even the gods have given up on this place. You pull your cloak tighter, glance once more at the tower where Stilicho once planned the defense of an empire, and keep walking. The sky above you is heavy, and to the east a faint wind begins to rise. The wind that rises over Ravenna carries more than just the scent of marsh and sea. It carries a name, Alaric. You hear it whispered in marketplaces, muttered in barracks, scribbled hastily in letters sent to nowhere in particular. The Gothic king is coming. Again. You leave Ravenna and travel south following rumors. Along the way you hear stories of him. A tall, brooding figure cloaked in black furs, riding a war horse that apparently bites, and speaking Latin better than half the Roman Senate. That last part might be exaggerated, but honestly, you wouldn't bet against it. You finally spot him from a distance, camped near the walls of Rome. His tents are orderly. Fires burn low and clean. His soldiers are disciplined, fed, and, most unsettling of all, waiting. Alaric is not just another barbarian warlord. He's a general who used to fight for the Romans, a man who understands how this empire works, and how it doesn't. He doesn't want to burn Rome. Not at first. He wants something far more annoying. Negotiations. You see, Alaric wants land, gold, and a seat at the table. He's tired of being treated like a tool. He's not asking to be emperor, but he is asking to be taken seriously. Which, in the eyes of Rome's dwindling elite, is somehow worse. Historians still argue whether Alaric was seeking peace or planning Rome's downfall all along. From where you stand, he looks more like a man pushed to the edge. He waits outside the city gates like a dinner guest who's been stood up 3 times, and he's getting hungry. Inside the city, panic simmers. The Roman Senate is flailing again. No Stilicho to hold the line. No competent military response, just frantic letters to Constantinople, and a lot of staring at maps like they're going to draw themselves. And so Alaric decides to make a point. You're there, walking the empty roads, outside the walls when it happens. Rome is besieged. Not stormed, not sacked, yet, but starved. Alaric cuts off supplies. Food dries up. Grain prices skyrocket. The elite hoard. The poor riot. It's all very on-brand for imperial collapse. You pass a baker's shop where the shelves are empty and someone has written, "We'll trade child for loaf," in charcoal on the door. Hopefully that's a joke. Hopefully. The Tiber runs sluggish with debris. Chickens are worth their weight in silver. Rats begin to vanish mysteriously from alleyways, which is never a good sign in any city, ancient or otherwise. You talk to a Roman woman who confesses she's boiling pine bark into soup. It doesn't taste like anything except regret. A senator tries to flee and is caught by a mob who strip him of his toga and his dignity. Surprisingly, he misses the toga more. Alaric, meanwhile, waits, patient, watchful. You see him ride along the city perimeter like a man examining a soft fruit before he decides whether to eat it. He sends envoys in. They return, shaking their heads. Honorius, still tucked away in Ravenna, refuses to meet any of Alaric's demands. He's more focused on pigeon races. Yes, seriously. Finally, the day comes, August 24th, 410 CE. The Visigoths breach the Salarian Gate, not with fire and screaming legions, but almost casually. One of the slaves inside just opens the door. You slip through behind them, and what follows is eerie, not explosive. The sack of Rome is less a barbaric rampage and more of a grim, organized plundering. Yes, buildings are looted. Yes, some violence occurs, but no temples are burned. Churches are largely spared. Even the tombs are respected. Well, most of them. The Visigoths aren't animals. They're hungry, tired, and slightly annoyed they had to go this far just to be acknowledged. You wander through the city as statues topple, coin hoards disappear, and silk robes vanish from palaces. A noble's dining set is carted away by a Goth who jokes it'll make a great gift for his mother. One soldier carries a harp he clearly doesn't know how to play. Another is debating whether to keep a marble bust of Cicero or smash it and use the head as a doorstop. You enter a church and see refugees huddled near the altar. A bishop prays aloud while trying not to glare at a Visigoth rummaging through the donation box. There's tension, but not mayhem. It's not the end of the world. Just the end of this world. There's a fringe story you overhear. Someone claims Alaric spared the city out of respect for St. Peter, whose tomb he allegedly visited. Others say he was just tired and didn't want the cleanup afterward. Either way, the sack lasts only 3 days. 3 days, and then the Visigoths leave. That's it. No prolonged occupation, no puppet emperor. They simply vanish into the countryside, heavier with loot and frustration. You trail behind them briefly and see Alaric staring south. He wants to take his people to Africa, to the grain-rich lands of Carthage, but a storm ruins his fleet before he can set sail. It's almost biblical. Then, not long after, Alaric dies. Sudden illness, maybe malaria, maybe exhaustion. Maybe the gods really do have a dark sense of timing. You hear one final legend, that Alaric is buried beneath a diverted riverbed, along with his treasures, and that the slaves who buried him were all killed to keep the secret. You look around at the landscape and think, yeah, that tracks. Rome, for its part, survives. But it's not the same. The sack isn't the end, but it's a humiliation, a symbolic wound. The eternal city was breached. People start talking about it in the past tense. Remember when Rome ruled the world? Becomes a thing you hear now. And you, watching the smoke curl up from abandoned villas, realize that something big has shifted. The center no longer holds. The barbarians are not at the gates. They've been inside, rearranged the furniture, and taken a few souvenirs. You walk the Appian Way as the sun sets over a quieter Rome, and for the first time it feels truly alone. You linger near the gates of Rome, long after Alaric and his Visigoths have vanished into the Italian countryside, leaving behind empty villas, scattered sandals, and one very confused parrot someone apparently left behind during the sack. The city is dazed but breathing. Barely. You walk the avenues slowly. Marble dust drifts through the air. The statues are still standing, mostly, though some have gained ironic accessories. One has a Gothic helmet perched on its head like a party favor. A wine jug rests in the outstretched hand of a statue of Minerva. She looks unimpressed, but no one here is celebrating. Rome has been sacked. Sure, it wasn't the fire and blood nightmare people feared, but it was symbolic. A line had been crossed. The unthinkable had become Tuesday. You pass a cluster of citizens discussing the events. One man is outraged. They broke into my atrium. Another shrugs. They gave my son a gold bracelet and taught him how to sharpen spears. Rome, after 410 CE, isn't a city rebuilt. It's a city left standing in embarrassment, like a champion boxer who just got knocked over by a toddler. The dignity is gone, even if the columns are still upright. You travel south with the wind, passing through town after town, noting a shift in atmosphere. People still call themselves Roman. They still wear togas at festivals. But the sense of central imperial power has drained out, like cheap wine from a cracked amphora. What you're witnessing is something stranger than defeat. It's indifference. You reach Naples, then Sicily. Local officials greet you politely and point to portraits of long-dead emperors, while quietly admitting they now take orders from nearby warlords. A merchant tells you, "Taxes? We just pay whoever has the biggest beard." You nod. Makes sense. The Roman economy, never particularly nimble, is now staggering. You wander through markets where actual coins are being weighed to check their metal content, because no one trusts their face value anymore. You see merchants using bags of grain, chickens, and sometimes finely combed wigs as currency. One man tries to buy olives with a live eel. The vendor accepts. The eel escapes. It's a whole thing. Some regions are doing okay, sort of. The landowning elites, or senatorial aristocracy, have turned their country villas into mini fiefdoms. You visit one such estate where the local lord still bathes daily, drinks imported wine, and recites Virgil. But even he admits the local Gothic commander eats free from his cellar once a week, as a courtesy. You can guess how optional that courtesy is. Historians still argue whether this shift in power from urban center to rural estate marked the true fall of Roman civilization. But from your sandals on the ground perspective, it looks less like a fall and more like a slow melting. The cities are still here, but shrinking. The countryside is alive, but under new management. You're invited to dinner in Capua by a bishop. He's warm, generous, and slightly drunk on wine that tastes suspiciously like vinegar. Between bites of overcooked goat, he sighs, "The empire is dying like an old man in his sleep," mumbling in Latin while the world forgets his name. You raise your goblet to that, mostly because it's your fourth. As you travel further inland, you find a peculiar thing. Some people don't even notice Rome's decline. In tiny villages, Life hasn't changed that much. The empire was always a distant idea, a name on a tax scroll or a figure on a coin. Now, still distant, people till fields, trade goods, pray to saints, and marry off daughters just like before. You meet a shepherd who says, "Empire? Is that the name of the new baker in town?" You laugh. He's not kidding. But then you reach a different kind of place, a city recently hit by a Gothic warband. Not Rome, not famous, just unlucky. You pick your way through a street where every door has been smashed in. There's ash in the wells and silence in the churches. The statues here aren't wearing helmets. They're headless. You pass a burnt ledger in the ruins of a magistrate's office, its ink charred beyond recognition. A child's wooden toy lies in the dust, perfectly untouched. The Gothic sack of Rome might have been gentle, but not all settlements are so lucky. And yet, even here, life pushes forward. A woman sweeps the steps of her damaged home. A priest nails a wooden cross to a half-standing chapel wall. You help a man lift a stone pillar off a collapsed roof, and he offers you some figs. As thanks. One fringe tale you hear in the ruins is about a Goth who, during a raid, fell in love with a Roman girl, tried to stay behind with her, and was killed by his own comrades for desertion. Locals now call him the Foreign Ghost, and leave wine at the spot where he died. You try it. It's not bad. A bit acidic. You sleep that night under the stars, wrapped in a worn blanket you traded for from a traveling monk. The moonlight glints off distant ruins, and you wonder how long before this landscape forgets who built what. In the darkness, you reflect on a simple truth. The barbarians didn't destroy Rome in a single blow. They chipped away at it, sure, but Rome did much of the crumbling on its own. Bureaucratic infighting, economic confusion, too many emperors, too few solutions, and chickens, always chickens. Somewhere nearby, a nightbird calls. A wolf howls once, then stops. The stars above are cold and clear, just as they were when Augustus ruled. But down here, on the cracked roads and abandoned villas, something is ending. You close your eyes and sleep under the ghosts of old banners. Morning finds you in a region once called Gaul, now a chessboard of forgotten provinces, splintered warlords, and unpredictable weather. You cross the craggy Alps under a pale sun, your cloak damp from melting snow, your boots crusted with the mud of 4 collapsed provinces. Welcome to the western frontier of the Western Roman Empire, if anyone's still using that title with a straight face. Once, Gaul was a glittering jewel of Roman strength. Rich soil, proud cities, excellent wine, and terrifying Drew was not. Odoacer is our church. It's a jigsaw puzzle of local powers pretending the empire is still functioning. Each town you pass claims to be loyal to Rome, but the Rome they're picturing is probably fictional at this point. You arrive in Arles, a city that still holds on to its Roman veneer with pride and duct tape. The amphitheater still hosts events, although now it's mostly arguments over water rights and an occasional play put on by the bishop's nephews. The bathhouses are cold. The markets sell more turnips than silks. But people here still recite Virgil in schools and call each other citizen like they mean it. They're also nervously eyeing their new neighbors, the Franks. The Franks didn't exactly invade Gaul. They just kind of oozed in, first as allies, then as settlers, then as landlords. You meet a Frankish chief who proudly shows you his Roman ring, taken from a local magistrate. He didn't need it, the chief says with a grin. He uses it now to stamp honey jars. Historians still argue whether the Franks were a threat or the logical next stage of Roman evolution. You're not sure either. One minute you're offered roasted lamb by a very polite Frankish woman. The next, her cousin is threatening to burn down a Roman tax collector's house over goat tariffs. In Trier, once an imperial capital, you find a city trapped in denial. The forum is still swept daily. Civic announcements are posted in Latin. But the garrison is gone, replaced by a militia that consists of 6 tired men and one very enthusiastic 12-year-old with a wooden spear. A senator's villa outside the city has been converted into a monastery. The mosaics are still beautiful, though they now depict saints instead of emperors. A young monk tells you, "Rome may fade, but the word endures." You nod politely. He offers you a chunk of hard bread and a copy of the Psalms. You accept both. As you travel through the countryside, you notice something odd. The Roman roads, those marvels of ancient engineering, are still in use, but barely. Potholes have become small ecosystems. At one point, you see a goat standing in what used to be a military milestone. No one knows the last time it was repaired. Someone carved "Don't Trip" into the side. The land is slowly returning to what it was before the legions came. Fragmented, tribal, self-governing. You meet a village elder who insists his people are still Roman citizens. When asked about taxes, he mutters something about creative interpretation. You suspect that means "we pay" in bread and mild fear. In a tavern near Lugdunum, you overhear a debate about whether the emperor is still alive. Half the patrons think yes. One insists it's all a hoax, and the real ruler is a Gallic bishop. Someone in the back shouts, "Bring back the Druids," and gets hit with a stale fig. Despite the political breakdown, culture persists. You hear Latin spoken with a thick Gallic accent. Children learn Roman numerals. A group of artisans carve the emperor's face into coins. Just in case, people are clinging to the framework of empire like it's a raft in the tide. There's a curious legend told by a traveling bard in Clermont. He claims a Roman general once tried to retake all of Gaul with just 50 men and a trained bear. No one believes him, but the story is popular. The bear even has a name, Consulus. You decide not to ask too many questions. You pass through once grand cities, now covered in ivy. Ruined temples now host goat auctions. A tax office has been turned into a bakery. You buy a loaf, and it's surprisingly good, though the receipt is printed on the back of an old edict. In Soissons, you meet a Roman general named Aegidius, one of the last truly Roman commanders in Gaul. He refuses to acknowledge the emperor in Ravenna and rules this pocket of territory as his own personal Roman island. His troops are loyal. His beard is excellent. And his wine, remarkably, doesn't taste like vinegar. You ask Aegidius if he still believes in the empire. He replies, "The empire isn't walls or senates. It's an idea. And I happen to like that idea, so I'll keep it going until someone pries it from my cold, marble hands." You respect the stubbornness, but even here, where Roman rule clings tightest, the cracks are showing. Bandits roam the countryside. Trade routes collapse. The Franks press harder every year. The bishops are the only ones who seem to know what's going on, and even they admit they're guessing. One night, while camping near an abandoned villa, you look up at the stars and think of the legions who once marched through here. Crisp uniforms, golden standards, Latin chants echoing off the hills. Now, the only marching you hear is a farmer dragging a stubborn mule across a field, and yet, oddly, there's peace in the decay. Without the pressure of empire, people are making do, living smaller, simpler. The future isn't clear, but it's no longer tied to Rome. Not really. As dawn breaks, you pack your things and head west, the rising sun glinting off broken roof tiles and dew-covered vines. Gaul is no longer Roman, but it hasn't figured out what it is yet. The road west leads you toward Britannia, though calling it Roman at this point is a bit like calling moldy bread still edible. It's the early 5th century, and Britannia has officially been abandoned by the empire, not ceremoniously, not with a noble speech, more like a last-minute breakup note pinned to a broken aqueduct. You board a small creaky ship from the Gallic coast. The captain is a fisherman, moonlighting as a smuggler who insists the seas are usually safe, except when they're not. Encouraging. The crossing is cold and choppy. Somewhere along the ride, your only dry sock goes missing, possibly to a seagull. You arrive in Duravernum, Canterbury to modern ears, soaked and sneezing, greeted by an enthusiastic farmer who informs you, "We haven't seen taxmen in years. It's been lovely." You wander inland and find the Roman infrastructure still standing. Sort of. The roads are cracked but passable. The bathhouses have turned into sheep pens. Villas now house extended families, chickens, and at least one ghost, according to local legend. The walls remain, but the garrisons are gone. You stop by what used to be a fort. It now functions as a town hall, grain storage unit, and, on Wednesdays, a venue for folk dancing. The local magistrate, wearing a rusted helmet and a tunic 2 sizes too big, gives you a short tour. "We still follow Roman law," he says proudly, "unless it's inconvenient. There's no emperor here, no army, no tax collection, and no reliable imports. The last official Roman soldiers withdrew around 410 CE, and ever since, Britannia has been on its own, adrift in a cold sea of Saxon raiders and nostalgic citizens. Historians still argue whether Rome chose to leave or was forced to let go. The official line was that Britannia needed to learn to defend itself. In reality, the empire was running elsewhere and tossed Britannia overboard to lighten the load. You attend a gathering in Londinium, a city once booming with trade and bathhouses, now eerily quiet. Moss creeps over statues of emperors no one remembers. A teacher gives Latin lessons to 4 bored children using chalk on a wooden plank. "We still believe in the Republic," she says, even though the Republic had died centuries before she was born. Here, local rulers have taken charge. Former Roman officials, landowners, bishops, anyone with a bit of influence has declared themselves in charge of their corner of the island. These micro-kingdoms squabble, trade, and occasionally unite against external threats, mainly the Saxons. You hear the name whispered with the same dread one might reserve for an overflowing chamber pot. The Saxons are coming. And they are. You ride out to the eastern coast, near modern-day Kent, and find villages where everyone sleeps with one eye open. Watchfires dot the cliffs. The Saxons arrive in small boats, silent, swift, and heavily armed. They raid, burn, and vanish, not unlike interns at a bad startup. In one village, you meet a boy named Lucius, who proudly shows you his wooden sword. He says he wants to grow up and become a Roman centurion. You nod, but gently ask, "Do you know what that means?" He replies, "It means I protect people and wear a cool helmet." He's not wrong, but there's no legion left to join. There's a bittersweet charm to this in-between era. Roman customs persist in the strangest places. You see a wedding ceremony where the couple exchange togas. A shrine to Jupiter repurposed as a Christian chapel still bears half a Latin prayer carved in the wall. An elderly man insists on calculating feast days using the Julian calendar, even though the local monks have switched to their own system involving moon sightings and educated guesses. One fringe story you hear involves a village that claims Hadrian's ghost walks the northern hills, muttering about wall maintenance and subpar tile work. A local sells authentic ghost pebbles for a silver coin. You buy 2. Up north, you visit the remnants of Hadrian's Wall. Once a proud frontier, now a very long sheep perch. You sit atop a collapsed tower and gaze into the fog beyond. The Picts still live out there, wild, tattooed, and deeply unimpressed by Roman plumbing. A retired centurion named Marius greets you by the fire. He stayed behind when the legions left, married a Briton woman, and now teaches the local boys how to fight with spears. "Rome's gone," he says, "but if we keep pretending it's still here, maybe things won't get worse." You sip from his rough clay cup and nod. He's trying. They all are. Despite the chaos, Christianity is spreading. Bishops organize what the governors no longer can. Churches rise from the ruins of temples. Faith is the new infrastructure, and sermons replace Senate decrees. And yet, you sense something else rising with the Saxon tide, a new identity, still murky. The beginning of the end of Roman Britain is also the beginning of something else. Something English eventually, but for now, just survival with a faint Latin accent. You leave the island under gray skies. Britannia waves you goodbye not with fanfare or banners, but with muddy boots, patchy cloaks, and a quiet resolve. Rome has left, but the people remain, holding on to fragments, baking bread in ruined villas, naming their sons Julian, whispering old laws like prayers. and somewhere, in the misty hills, a goat sneezes inside a Roman helmet. You arrive back on the continent, boots squelching with seawater and memories of British drizzle, and head south toward Italy again, specifically to the heart of the fading empire, Ravenna. Once, Rome was the center of everything. Then it wasn't. Then it was Ravenna. And now, even Ravenna is starting to feel more like a waiting room for history than the engine of an empire. You walk its damp, narrow streets under a milky gray sky. The buildings lean slightly. Mosaics glimmer faintly with the leftover glory of imperial budgets long dried up. Here in Ravenna, the last emperors of the West still wear purple, but more like a hand-me-down bathrobe than a robe of state. And that brings you to Romulus Augustulus. Yes, that's his real name. Romulus, like the mythical founder of Rome. Augustulus, meaning Little Augustus. Historians still argue whether this was fate, irony, or someone trying very hard to force poetic closure. Either way, the kid was about 14 years old when he became emperor. You meet him in a quiet courtyard. He's feeding pigeons. Of course, his crown is too big, his eyes are kind, and he has the weary patience of someone who knows he's playing emperor for an audience that already left the theater. You learn quickly that Romulus wasn't chosen by destiny. He was installed by his father, Orestes, a powerful general who'd once served Attila the Hun, and now fancied a puppet emperor he could keep in check. The boy does his best, attends ceremonies, smiles at coin designs with his face on them, probably asks politely if he can take a nap afterward. But the empire he's meant to rule barely exists. Italy is riddled with Gothic federates, unpaid troops, and senatorial bickering, the treasuries echoing like an amphitheater during off-season. And then comes the straw, or rather, the Herulian boot, that breaks the imperial back. A warlord named Odoacer rises from the ranks of the disgruntled federate troops. He's part Germanic, part ambitious, and fully done with being ignored. His soldiers want land. Orestes refuses. Odoacer doesn't like that answer. You can see where this is going. You follow Odoacer's movements like a tourist at a very dramatic play. He marches on Ravenna. Orestes tries to resist but is quickly captured and executed. Romulus, sitting quietly in his palace, probably rereading Virgil, is soon confronted by this tall, armor-clad stranger who effectively says, "Okay, kid, playtime's over." And here's the twist. Odoacer doesn't kill Romulus. He spares him, sends him into comfortable exile at a villa in Campania with a modest pension. The last Roman emperor of the West retires before he finishes puberty. There's something almost sweet about it. The empire ends not with a scream, but with an awkward hug and a severance package. You travel to that villa. It's quiet, peaceful. The olive trees sway in the wind. Locals say Romulus spends his days writing poetry and feeding chickens. You smile? Of course he does. This moment, 476 CE, is often marked as the fall of the Western Roman Empire. You expect fireworks, a calendar flipping, maybe a trumpet fanfare announcing the end of an age. Instead, it's barely noticed. Most people don't even know an emperor just got fired. The bureaucracy lumbers on. The Senate still meets. Coins are still minted, just with Odoacer's face now. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. Life continues. You walk through the streets of Ravenna after the dust settles. A merchant still argues over olive prices. Children still chase each other past fountains. A local poet recites something about Saturn and figs. Rome has fallen, and yet, the sky hasn't. You overhear a bishop say, "The empire was a body. The soul left long ago. The limbs are just now realizing it." There's a fringe tale told in the inns around this time, that Romulus Augustulus kept a small clay figure of a wolf and two twins, Romulus and Remus, in his room. On the night he was deposed, he supposedly placed it on a windowsill and whispered, "Time to rest." You don't know if that's true, but you kind of hope it is. Odoacer, now king of Italy, rules in the name of the Eastern Emperor, Zeno, over in Constantinople. He doesn't claim to be a new Caesar, he just gets things done. Italy is now a kingdom wearing the mask of an empire. No one's fooled, but no one protests too loudly either. You ride south, past ruined villas, grazing goats, and bored senators who now mostly just complain over wine. A sign by the road still reads, "Imperial Post Station." You stop. It's closed. A chicken has moved in, and as you travel, you notice how Roman identity doesn't vanish. It adapts. Odoacer keeps the Senate, keeps Roman law. Latin still echoes through churches. The idea of Rome is too big to kill in one generation. Maybe in several, but not yet. You sit at a crossroads, watching travelers pass by. Goths, Romans, monks, merchants. And you wonder, did Rome fall? Or did it just exhale? The sun dips low behind the hills. Somewhere in a quiet villa, a boy named Romulus is writing something in the margins of a worn-out scroll. And the empire, once the master of the known world, finally lies still. You wake in the hills outside Naples to birdsong and the distant clank of someone trying and failing to repair a broken chariot axle. The empire is gone, but people still have places to be. You sip from a cracked clay cup and reflect. This world has become a patchwork quilt, stitched from what's left of Rome, but now covered in Gothic embroidery. You head inland, following whispers of a new power center forming, not from senators or emperors, but from bishops. In the vacuum left by the collapse of imperial authority, the Christian church has quietly, gently, and somewhat miraculously moved in to fill the role of state, therapist, and neighborhood watch. You enter a town where the bishop owns more property than all the noble families combined. People kiss his ring, ask him for grain, and offer him chickens for blessings. Not bad for a guy in sandals. In Rome, what's left of it, the bishop, the pope, is no longer just a spiritual guide. He's a negotiator, a civic leader, and occasionally a goat arbitrator. When the grain shipments fail, the people don't ask the emperor, they ask the bishop. When bandits threaten the roadways, local priests organize defense. You even see one armed with a rusty sword and a hymn book. Historians still debate whether this shift was inevitable or simply a stroke of luck. You decide it's both. The church had the infrastructure, literacy, networks, a moral code, and an uncanny ability to survive plagues. The state had crumbled, but the scriptoria, those little rooms where monks copied texts, were humming along. You spend a night in one such monastery, nestled in the Apennines. The monks welcome you with soup and silence. By candlelight, they copy works of Cicero, Augustine, and Galen. Occasionally, one doodles a cat in the margins. This, you realize, is how civilization survives. Not through conquest, but through very careful handwriting. In the countryside, former Roman nobles have either fled, been absorbed, or adapted. You meet a man named Maximus, who insists he's descended from emperors. His toga is patched. His estate is half goat pasture, and he offers you a stew that may or may not contain squirrel. Still, he speaks proudly of Roman virtues, honor, duty, hygiene, while scratching his leg with a twig. Then you hear another name whispered across Italy, especially in the back rooms of crumbling villas and makeshift marketplaces. Theodoric. He's coming. And unlike the Gothic warbands of before, Theodoric is educated, ambitious, and terrifyingly competent. He's the king of the Ostrogoths, raised in Constantinople, fluent in Latin, Greek, and probably sarcasm. He grew up in the heart of the Eastern Empire, sent as a hostage, and came back knowing exactly how Roman bureaucracy and Roman arrogance worked. You travel north as his army marches through Italy, almost like a parade with spears. When he arrives in Ravenna, Odoacer is still in charge, and the two men agree to share power. Yes, really. Two ambitious military leaders co-ruling. You know how that's going to end. Spoiler. It ends with Odoacer stabbed at a banquet. Theodoric personally does the honors. Some sources say he cut him in half from collarbone to hip. You're not sure how one even does that, but either way, Odoacer's dinner plans are permanently cancelled. Theodoric becomes the new king of Italy in 493 CE, and strangely, things improve. You spend time in Ravenna again, and this time, you see actual repairs happening. Aqueducts fixed, roads swept, bureaucrats paid. Theodoric keeps the Roman administration, hires Roman civil servants, and makes Gothic nobles wear Roman tunics at court, which they do while quietly grumbling into their beards. Theodoric builds churches, palaces, and bathhouses. His reign is peaceful, for a while. He's not trying to become Caesar. He's trying to be better than Caesar. And honestly, he kind of succeeds. You attend a city forum where Theodoric's portrait is displayed next to those of ancient emperors. A merchant mutters, "He's not Roman, but he's good at pretending." That might be the highest compliment a Gothic king can get from an old Roman merchant. Fringe tales about Theodoric swirl like wine in a cheap amphora. One says he keeps a Roman philosopher in his court, who teaches Gothic children how to conjugate Latin verbs and recite Virgil backwards. Another says he once debated a bishop about the nature of divine justice, and won. Historians still argue whether Theodoric saved Italy or simply prolonged its illusion of empire. You walk through the streets he cleaned, past the buildings he restored, and think, does it matter? One day, you sit near the mausoleum Theodoric built for himself. It's a sturdy, squat structure with a domed roof of solid stone, cut from a single piece. No frills, no overblown symbolism, just permanence. And that's what Theodoric wanted. Not glory, not conquest. Legacy. As dusk falls over Ravenna, you stroll along the canals. A group of children play near the mosaic-covered churches, their laughter echoing like ancient prayers. Rome may be gone, but you realize something else. Romanness is not. It's in the bricks, in the books, in the way people still organize cities, argue in forums, and paint their walls. The empire is dead. Long live the idea. You sit under a flickering torch, scribbling notes with a borrowed stylus, and wonder how future historians will tell this tale. Will they focus on the emperors, the invasions, or the quiet scribes in stone monasteries who kept the fire alive? Your stomach growls. A monk offers you bread. It's dry, but good. You eat, you smile, and you rest your head against a pillar carved by someone who believed Rome would last forever. You leave Ravenna behind, the last flickers of imperial elegance still glimmering behind you like candlelight in a drafty room. Your path takes you east now, tracing the crumbling edge where the Western Roman Empire once met its stubborn, thriving cousin, the Eastern Roman Empire, better known to its friends and fans as Byzantium. Crossing into the Balkan frontier, you quickly notice something strange. Things still function. Roads are better maintained. Fortresses are manned. People here complain about taxes, yes, but they actually pay them. You mutter a quiet, "What sorcery is this?" and realize this is what a functioning state feels like. Your destination? Constantinople. You sail across the Adriatic, the waters smoother than expected, save for one storm that nearly sends your luggage and your dinner overboard. You arrive at the gleaming walls of the city, walls so thick you could ride a chariot along the top. The Theodosian walls, they're called, built when Rome still pretended to be invincible. Here the emperor is Zeno, a wiry, shrewd figure with a sharp mind and a diplomatic smile that could slice bread. He's technically the emperor of the Romans, but you quickly see that Constantinople has its own personality, Eastern, opulent, more Greek than Latin, and deeply uninterested in cleaning up the Western mess. You hear people talk about the West like it's a crazy uncle. Oh yes, we used to have a branch in Milan, but it caught fire. The fall of Rome in 476 barely caused a ripple here. The East had its own problems, Persian threats, theological debates so intense they'd make modern political arguments seem polite, and the occasional circus riot that turned into a minor civil war. Still, Constantinople is dazzling. Golden domes, endless markets, spices from India, silks from China, and olives from absolutely everywhere. You stand in the hippodrome, watching chariot races while nobles wager absurd sums of money. The crowd roars, not for emperors or generals, but for their favorite racing teams, the blues and the greens. You quickly learn to choose a side. Choose wrong, and you might get punched by a nun. Back in the palace, Zeno receives ambassadors, bishops, and at least 2 people trying to sell him relics of questionable origin. One claims to have Julius Caesar's toothbrush. Zeno declines. Though he's emperor in title over East and West, Zeno knows the Western crown is symbolic at best. When Odoacer sends the imperial regalia back to him, complete with crown, scepter, and a polite note that says, "We're good, thanks," Zeno accepts it. He doesn't fight. He doesn't send armies. He just nods and files the West under past tense. Historians still argue whether the Eastern Empire deliberately let the West collapse or simply couldn't save it. From what you see, Zeno had bigger fish to fry. Literally. The palace kitchens serve fried fish on Fridays, and the menu changes depending on the bishop's mood. One evening, you sit with a Greek merchant who tells you, the West was obsessed with tradition. Here, we adapt. You don't survive this long without learning to wiggle. He wiggles his fingers to demonstrate. You politely don't ask for an encore. What's fascinating is that Constantinople still calls itself Roman. Its people still write in Latin. Officially, anyway. Its emperors still claim descent from Augustus. But the language in the streets is Greek. The food is spicy. And the guards wear tunics with Persian embroidery. Rome has moved. Not just physically, but culturally, spiritually. The torch has passed, whether the West likes it or not. You hear whispers of Theodoric, yes, the same Gothic king ruling Italy now, being named a patrician by Zeno, a Gothic king formerly acknowledged as a Roman noble. You blink. It's either genius diplomacy or the most passive-aggressive way to admit you've lost control. The Byzantine bureaucracy is impressive, terrifying, and layered like a Byzantine onion. Every position has 3 titles, 2 robes, and at least 1 ceremonial hat. You try asking for directions to the imperial archives and get redirected through 5 different clerks, 2 courtyards, and a cat. But the archives, once you find them, are beautiful. Scrolls stacked like gold, chronicling centuries of imperial orders, treaties, and one very stern note from a 3rd century magistrate about stolen sandals. You ask a historian in the city if the empire truly fell. He raises an eyebrow and says, "Fall? The empire is right here. We simply changed our accent." And he's right in a way. Rome's ghost is alive in every law, every coin, every military drill, taught to a nervous conscript from Cappadocia. You realize the idea of Rome didn't die. It metastasized. The West collapsed under its own weight, but the East grew leaner, faster, meaner. You end your days in Constantinople, walking the marble streets by moonlight. The towers glimmer. Distant prayers echo from a church with gold leaf mosaics. A woman sells roasted nuts near a statue of Constantine. She tells you the city will never fall. You smile. You've heard that before. But for now she's right. Constantinople endures. The Roman eagle still flies, just with a slightly different haircut. And in this city of survival and reinvention, the old world hums beneath the new, like a melody. Everyone knows, even if they've forgotten the words. Ooh, step away from Constantinople's glittering perfection and head west once more, not back into the heart of the old empire, but into its scarred and wild outer edges. You're on the hunt for something less visible than emperors or churches. You want to know what the people think. The farmers, the innkeepers, the potters making cups that no one calls Roman anymore, but still look suspiciously Roman. You walk into the Balkans, where the earth is restless and borders shift weekly. You pass through former Roman towns where the villas have become ghost traps, walls still standing but overtaken by ivy, wild pigs, and gossip. You sleep in an abandoned granary and wake to the sound of 2 goats arguing outside your door. And in these small towns and farms, you begin to hear it. The slow, subtle changing of identity. Once upon a time, everyone wanted to be Roman. Now, not so much. Now it's about being local. Your tribe, your bishop, your land. One farmer proudly tells you he's of the land of Illyria. You ask him if that's still technically Roman territory. He squints and says, "Maybe, but I still pay my priest more than my tax man." It's a big shift. You attend a feast in a mountain village where Roman table manners have been replaced by communal bowls and a tradition where the last person to finish their lentils has to sing. You sing. Badly. You're not invited back. One evening, you sit by a fire in a stone cottage while an elderly woman weaves a blanket. She speaks a mix of Latin, Slavic, and local dialect, so blended that even the village dog looks confused. She tells you her grandmother used to walk on paved Roman roads to buy olive oil. Now the road is gone, and they make do with pig fat. She shrugs. Empires end, blankets stay warm. Historians still argue whether this was truly the end of Roman culture or just a transformation. From your soot-smudged seat in this candlelit room, it feels like the empire faded, not exploded. like a long-held note that eventually quiets into silence. And still, bits of Rome remain. You pass a school where a local priest teaches children to read the Bible using broken Roman tablets. You find a ruined amphitheater converted into a village market. Underneath a crumbling triumphal arch, a teenager is sketching it into a notebook with charcoal. When asked why, he shrugs. It looks cool. You travel westward into North Africa, once a jewel in Rome's crown, now ruled by the Vandals. And no, they're not quite as chaotic as their name suggests, though you do meet one who tries to sell you a genuine Roman nose ring that is very obviously a door hinge. In Carthage, you discover a city oddly content under its new rulers. The Vandals are Arian Christians, meaning they believe Jesus was created, not eternal. It's a theological rift that makes local bishops sweat profusely at dinner parties. But the city itself? Still bustling. Aqueducts work, bread gets baked, commerce ticks along like an overworked sundial. You speak with a Roman merchant who shrugs at the regime change. I used to bribe Roman officials. Now I bribe Gothic ones. What's the difference? He has a point. And here's a twist you didn't expect. The Vandals maintain the Roman fleet. In fact, they use it to raid the Mediterranean. From a cozy dock, you watch a shipload of Vandal sailors singing sea shanties and eating dried figs. A Roman captain-turned-advisor offers you a flask and says, "They're better seamen than we were. Don't print that." The further you travel, the clearer it becomes. Rome's collapse wasn't a single event. It was 1,000 tiny shifts, some loud, like Gothic invasions, some quiet, like a town changing its coinage from imperial silver to scrap tin with a bishop's face on it. You hear a fringe tale in the deserts near Tripolitania that a Roman soldier, stranded after his unit was disbanded, married a Berber woman and became a local chief. His descendants now guard an oasis, worship both saints and ancestors, and call themselves the Legion of the Sands. No one knows if it's true, but they tell it with pride. You meet former Roman citizens who no longer call themselves Roman. "That was my grandfather's world," one says. "Now we just try not to starve." You can't argue with that logic. Empires are for historians. Dinner is for everyone. You climb a windswept ridge in what used to be Mauritania Caesariensis. The fortress there is mostly rubble, but you find a single Roman eagle carved into a stone. It's been defaced, turned into something resembling a fish. Art is subjective. You sit for a while, watching the desert stretch into the horizon, and you think about the people who once believed this empire would last forever. Soldiers who marched under its standards, writers who composed odes to its greatness, emperors who thought their names would echo forever. Now, their statues are bird nests, their coins are melted, their laws are misunderstood and misquoted by village elders with cracked teeth and excellent soup. And yet, something persists, not the empire, but the memory of it, fuzzy, idealized, filtered through nostalgia, but alive. A farmer still calls his barn the Basilica. A monk ends his prayer with Pax Romana. A child in a dusty alley traces a Roman numeral in the dirt, thinking it's a game. You exhale and feel the wind on your face, warm and ancient. The Western Roman Empire may be gone, but in the cracks of stone and the lullabies of shepherds, its echo lingers, soft as dust, firm as memory. You turn your path north now, toward the lands that were once beyond even Rome's grasp, or barely within it, across the Danube and into the murky territory once called Germania. If the Western Roman Empire was a fading opera, this land feels like a folk song sung around a fire, sometimes off-key, often improvised, and always louder after mead. Here, there's no Roman Senate, no togas, no marble colonnades, but Rome's fingerprints still smudge the landscape. You travel through Thuringia, where local tribes once feared the eagle banners. Now they wear bits of Roman armor as fashion statements. One chieftain shows off a ceremonial helmet he's turned into a drinking bowl. You don't ask about the smell. He calls it tribute to a great enemy. You call it mildly terrifying. Historians still debate whether these Germanic kingdoms were Rome's destroyers or her ungrateful students. You can see both sides. Many of these tribes were foederati, allied peoples Rome invited to settle within her borders, trained by Roman generals, paid with Roman gold, given Roman land. It's like hiring a house guest and then being surprised when they move into the master bedroom. In Bavaria, you stumble into a midsummer festival. There's roasted boar, shouting, arm wrestling, and a bard singing what is unmistakably a Roman ballad, just with the Latin turned into something that sounds like a sneeze halfway through. The crowd doesn't care. They dance anyway. The past is malleable out here. You spend a few days with the Burgundians, who've carved out a small kingdom from the scraps of Gaul. Their laws are based partly on Roman precedent, partly on custom, and partly on whatever sounds fair at the moment. A local judge settles a goat theft case by making both parties race barefoot through nettles. Justice is swift and itchy. Oddly enough, the Roman calendar persists. Market days are still called by Roman names. Saturni dies. Martus dies. A few locals even celebrate Roman-style kalends, though now it involves beer instead of sacrifices. You participate. It ends with you wearing a laurel crown made from lettuce. The Goths, too, have left their mark. You journey through parts of Austria where the Visigoths once passed through, leaving ruined villas, buried hoards of coin, and, according to legend, one very grumpy ghost who appears every full moon wearing mismatched sandals. You're told the story by a monk who also runs a small brewery. He's not sure which came first, the ghost or the beer. You buy both and pretend to be brave. Despite the Germanic veneer, you realize that Roman ideas survived by absorption. Tribal kings issue edicts in Latin, even if they can't pronounce them. Their clerks copy Roman law codes by candlelight, occasionally drawing doodles in the margins. You find one depicting a senator being chased by a duck. You meet a Frankish noble who keeps a pet peacock, a marble bust of Trajan, and a mosaic floor he swears was looted respectfully. He refers to himself as Consul of the Grain Tax. You suspect that title is entirely made up, but no one questions it, so he wears it with pride, and a disturbingly large belt buckle. In one forest settlement, a child points at your sandals and says, "Are you from the Old Kingdom?" You ask what she means. She says, "The one in the stories, the place with shiny swords and tall buildings, where people didn't get lost in the woods so much." You smile. Even children raised far from Roman roads remember Rome, not accurately, but fondly. You continue north until the roads vanish entirely, swallowed by moss and memory. You find a Roman milestone, half buried, covered in lichen. The inscription is barely legible. You brush it off and read, "To the glory of the emperor." The emperor's name is scratched out. Someone long ago decided he wasn't worth remembering. And maybe that's the real shift. In the empire's heyday, names mattered. Augustus, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius. But now, the idea of Rome itself matters more than the men who ran it. It's become a symbol, a blueprint, a bedtime story with swords. You join a wagon train of traders moving east, Slavs, Huns, and a Greek who insists on reciting Homer every night by firelight, whether you want him to or not. Along the road, you pass a group of villagers rebuilding a collapsed bridge. They don't know who designed it, just that it was Roman, and it worked. One man tells you, "We don't need emperors. We need things that last." And that's what lingers here. Not the government, not the taxes, not the border markers or the legions. What lingers is function, aqueducts, bridges, written law. A belief, however muddled, that life can be organized, that roads can connect rather than divide, that ideas are stronger than swords, eventually. As night falls, you camp beneath the stars. The sky is clear, the fire is warm. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf howls, and a donkey responds with a bray so dramatic, you assume it studied theater. You sit quietly, pen in hand, and jot down a single sentence. Rome did not fall. It dissolved, reformed, and hid inside the bones of others. You close your notebook and smile. Your journey now takes you back to the heartland, or what's left of it. Italy again, but not the Italy of emperors and marble. No, this is the Italy of overgrown roads, fortified hill towns, and arguments over which bishop owns which stretch of olive trees. You walk slowly through the Tuscan countryside, where the ruins of villas rise like broken teeth from the soil. Farmers plow fields where senators once debated policy. Chickens strut through the remains of bathhouses. You arrive in Rome expecting ghosts. And you get them. The city, once the unstoppable engine of the ancient world, now sighs under the weight of its own grandeur. You step through the forum, and it's like visiting the skeleton of a god. Columns stand cracked and lonely. Statues are headless. Graffiti scrawled by people long gone reads, "Felix made good cheese here." Only about 20,000 people live in Rome now, maybe fewer. It used to hold over 1 million. Entire neighborhoods are abandoned, repurposed, or simply forgotten. A shepherd leads his flock across the Palatine Hill, and you watch as one goat confidently relieves itself on the base of a once great imperial arch. You find housing in an old tenement building. Its upper floors collapsed, its lower ones now shared by 3 families, and a cat named Maximus Decimus Fluffius. Your bed creaks with every breath. The air smells like oil lamps, wet clay, and the distant hint of disappointment. Still, life goes on. You follow a procession to St. Peter's Basilica, where crowds gather for a holy day. The church shines, not with gold, but with hope. It has become the new Rome, the center of what's left of power and order. The Pope is not just a religious leader anymore, he's a negotiator, a peacemaker, and occasionally a reluctant plumber when the baptistry floods. Inside, a bishop reads a sermon in Latin. The congregation understands only fragments, but they nod as if each word is holy. You look around and realize language may fade, but ritual sticks. Later, you sit beside an elderly priest who speaks of the empire with affection and exhaustion. "It was like a giant lantern," he says. "When it burned, we all basked in its light. Now that it's gone, we're learning to make our own candles." You scribble that one down. Historians still argue whether Rome's final years were tragedy or farce. From where you sit, on a stone step warmed by afternoon sun, it feels more like drama-turned-documentary. A long, slow slide, no explosion, just fatigue. You walk past the Colosseum, where once there were gladiators, crowds, emperors. Now there are moss, birds, and a few ambitious beggars who pretend to be fallen centurions. You give one a coin. He says "Ave," and immediately sneezes. You stop at a small shop built into the side of an ancient aqueduct. The shopkeeper sells bread, wine, and coins from old emperors, most of them fake. He grins and tells you, "If it says Nero, it's probably mine." But hey, he would have approved. There's an odd pride among the people here. Rome has fallen, yes, but they survived it. They live among the ruins, not as mourners, but as tenants in a very old house with leaky pipes and excellent stories. You attend a wedding in the Pantheon, once a temple, now a church. The bride arrives on a donkey. The groom forgets his vows. A child throws olives instead of flowers. It's perfect. That night, you dine with a family who claim descent from Scipio Africanus. Their kitchen is lit by a Roman oil lamp, their walls adorned with medieval saints, and their table covered in both pasta and lentils, a culinary handshake between past and present. You speak with the matriarch, who tells you that her grandfather once tried to claim an imperial title during a wine-fueled argument. He declared himself emperor of the courtyard, she says. He was dethroned by a broom. The empire may be gone, but the stories are immortal. As you walk home, through the broken streets, your foot catches on a cracked tile, inscribed with a Latin quote. You kneel to read it, brushing away dust. It says, Roma Eterna. Rome is eternal. You sit with that for a moment. Not as a literal statement, of course, but as a sentiment, a declaration of stubbornness, a refusal to fully disappear. The buildings may fall, the emperors may fade, but Rome, the idea, the rhythm, the story, remains. And that's when you notice it. Children playing in the rubble, one pretending to be a general, another declaring a tax on figs. They're shouting in a mix of Latin, Italian, and something entirely made up. And you think, it's starting again. From ruin, new stories. From dust, a heartbeat. You stay in Rome longer than expected. There's something strangely magnetic about this half-forgotten city, like a tune you can't stop humming, even if the notes are cracked and the lyrics forgotten. But eventually, you gather your satchel, pat Maximus the cat farewell, and begin a final loop around the world the Western Roman Empire left behind. Your first stop is the Alps, where you visit mountain passes once guarded by Roman soldiers in creaking leather and freezing armor. Now, they're patrolled by goats and monks. You stop at a tiny hilltop monastery, where the brothers copy scripture, tend gardens, and keep detailed weather logs that are mostly just drawings of clouds with little frowny faces. Inside, a monk named Leo shows you a cabinet of treasures, Roman coins, shattered amphorae, a rusted legionary dagger, and a pair of sandals that look suspiciously like your own. He holds up a scroll and says, "This one's Cicero. He was chatty." Then he sneezes, and you both pretend the scroll wasn't damaged. This is where the memory of Rome hides, in high stone rooms, candlelit and quiet, where the written word is sacred. Historians still debate whether monasteries saved civilization or just picked through the leftovers. Either way, you're grateful for the effort. You descend into Gaul again, now a kingdom in everything but name. The Franks rule here, led by ambitious kings who barely pretend to be Roman anymore. You attend a royal feast where the wine flows like a flooded aqueduct, and someone attempts to sing in Latin while falling off a stool. You ask the steward if the king still uses Roman law. He snorts and says, only when it helps him win an argument. And yet, Rome lingers. In the layout of cities, in the Latin titles, scrawled in charters, in the Catholic Church, now firmly rooted, dressing its bishops in robes borrowed from imperial administrators. You pass through Aquitaine, where Roman villas have become vineyards. A winemaker proudly shows you his cellar, built on an old Roman bath. The water's gone, he says, but the humidity's perfect. You visit Toledo, where Visigothic kings issue laws in Latin, wear Roman rings, and pretend to hate Rome while naming their sons after emperors. One nobleman shows you a mosaic of Theodosius in his dining room and says, "We're definitely not Roman, but if we were, we'd be this guy." You sit with scribes copying law codes from centuries ago. The texts are patched, altered, sometimes creatively interpreted. A footnote in one reads, "Editor's note, this part is confusing but sounds important. Best not to delete." Fair. Farther west, you reach Lusitania, where locals claim their roads were built by Romans and blessed by saints. One elderly man insists his olive press has been running since the reign of Trajan. You check it. It definitely smells like it. On your way back through Gaul, you stop at a crumbled Roman temple, now used as a barn. Cows wander beneath faded frescoes of Jupiter. A child offers you milk and asks if Rome was real. You say yes. She nods and asks if it had dragons. You pause. "Only metaphorical ones," you reply. She seems satisfied. The Rhine frontier is next. Once the edge of civilization, now a loose border between tribes, lords, and anyone with a sword. Roman forts lie in ruin, yet local leaders still build castles on their foundations. Rome, it seems, still gives permission, even if she's long gone. You hear a fringe tale in the Black Forest of a centurion who refused to leave his post, even after the empire vanished. They say he stood guard until he turned into stone. A mossy statue sits by the road, holding a broken spear. People leave offerings, bread, coins, sometimes wine. You do the same. And finally, your feet carry you back to Italy, where the world is changing again. Theodoric is dead. His Gothic kingdom is fracturing. The Eastern Roman Empire is stirring, its eye turning westward once more. You hear rumors of a general named Belisarius, sent by Emperor Justinian to reclaim lost lands. The thought sends a chill down your spine. Could Rome come back? You don't know. No one does. But you see signs, subtle ones. Laws issued in Latin again, coins stamped with the old eagle, roads repaved, however poorly, and, in every dusty village, someone who still calls themselves Roman, even if they say it with a wink. You return one last time to the Roman Forum. A storm brews, wind whistles through the ruins, and you stand among cracked columns and broken pedestals, and feel something both profound and mundane. Rome never really ended. It broke apart, morphed, hid, and in doing so, it became immortal, not in power but in imprint. It's in the laws you've seen, the cities you've walked, the languages that echo it, the ideas of unity, order, and ridiculous ambition. It's in aqueducts and architecture, saints and senators, monks and mosaics, legal scrolls and children's bedtime stories. You sit on a moss-covered stone. Someone once carved SPQR into it. It's nearly worn away. You trace it with your finger anyway. So now, as the fire burns low and your breath softens, let your thoughts drift gently through the ruins we've wandered together. Imagine the soft whisper of wind through broken arches, the hush of sandals on ancient stones, the glow of candlelight over parchment in a quiet monastery. These sounds, these scenes, they echo across centuries. Let the names fall away. Odoacer, Theodoric, Romulus Augustulus, leave them behind like old coins in the dust. Let your mind smooth over the violence, the treaties, the fading banners. Let it all blur into soft color, ochre stone, twilight skies, flickering torchlight reflected in silent fountains. You don't need to remember every date. You don't need to carry the weight of history. Just hold on to the feeling of things ending, yes, but also continuing, of change that's slow, like vines reclaiming a villa, of empires shrinking into stories, and stories slipping into dreams. Breathe in the dry air of a Roman summer. Breathe out the last sigh of a vanished world. You are not standing in a ruin. You are lying under stars, warm and still, the heartbeat of ancient footsteps fading in your ears. You are part of the long after, a listener in the quiet, a dreamer in the echo. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your limbs sink deep, and let the world of Rome crumble gently behind you, like sand slipping from a tired hand, because the empire may fall, but you sleep on.